This is a problem. Good evening, everybody. Have a story today that I wanted to go over. We're not going to do word of the day today. I just ran out of time, and I wanted to go over this. I want to preface this by saying, I spent quite a few years in Detroit, Michigan, and in the urban area, and I feel like I have some insight into this type of situation, and I wanted to go over it with you because I think it's really important. I think if you saw this with the right perspective, I think real change could occur. So I want to get to that now. Here we go. It says in Milwaukee, thousands of vacant homes and lots threaten neighborhood safety and property values. Okay, so even in the title, they have it right. It threatens neighborhood safety and property values. And in the end, I'll show you where I think that the property values are the key here to the making things better. And it starts off with a woman that was on her front porch, and she looked across the street, and squatters in a vacant home had set a fire. And it says the fire was a vivid and frightening example of why vacant homes are such a nuisance in neighborhoods and why they can pose such a significant safety threat. And it's so true. So this is in Milwaukee. It says there's been more than 7,400 vacant properties logged into the Milwaukee Department of Neighborhood Services system since its vacant buildings program began in 2010. More than 2,500 remain vacant. Old housing stock, property seizure laws, and skyrocketing repair costs have conspired to create one of Milwaukee's biggest ironies. In a city that lacks affordable housing, there are also too many vacant homes. And then you can see this picture. It says vacant properties have become illegal dumping havens. It's a problem that has nagged the city for years, but it has nagged many, many major cities for a long time. So it goes through some statistics that says that, there could be more vacant properties based on the economics right now. But then it goes into talking about, in Milwaukee, it says not one block has not been affected in our community by either an abandoned house or vacant lot. Everything that happens to that vacant house affects you in the community, and that's true, 100%. Then it talks to this fellow here. His name is Alan Malik, and it says that over the years, research has piled up showing that vacant homes represent a significant blight on communities. They are a terrible problem. There's a huge amount of research that shows if you have vacant properties on your block, your own house, no matter how nice it is, will be worth less. It becomes a magnet for crime. People break in. It's more likely to be set on fire. You just go down the list. Having vacant properties undermines the economic and social underpinnings of a neighborhood. And that's 100% right. I mean, one vacant house will cause a significant amount of damage. It says, but there's also research that suggests the same is true of vacant lots. So it says a vacant lot, if not maintained and allowed to become a place where people dump stuff, can be almost as bad of a problem as a vacant building. And that's right. And so in Detroit, you have blocks and blocks and blocks of vacant homes, or you have one house in one block and the rest is, and it's burnt down. It's just terrible. And then it goes with this fellow that he lives there, and he's a developer, and he owns over 68 housing units. And, he became involved in real estate, and he had high hopes that he could use his skills to support neighborhoods like the one he grew up in and offer affordable, well-maintained rental housing to low-income residents. And, so here's a guy that's putting in his own money, in theory, to make the community better. And he says, illegal dumping as an owner is the greatest impediment to making quality of life good for residents. I routinely cut my grass, lock up my trash, and utilize pest control. No matter what I do to my building, illegal dumping is not conducive to quality life. Vacant lots, vacant buildings, these are illegal dumping havens. He said he routinely files complaints about tall grass and junk removal, but the city is slow to respond, and the behavior doesn't stop. And so, when you're a city and you're dealing with a decline, your services go down. So it's terrible. And then you have these things where people come up with these great laws that are supposed to fix things. So like in Milwaukee, homeowners are required to register their property as vacant if it's empty for more than 30 days. Then they're inspected quarterly if a complaint is lodged. Normally, if you've got a vacant property, it's a forfeiture, essentially. You've given up. You've said, I'm not doing this anymore, and you leave. You've already done that. Are you really going to fill out a piece of paper that says that it's vacant? And then, interesting, he talks, the fellow that has the rental says that state law should provide some way if a property is clearly vacant and abandoned to expedite giving that to someone who can do something with the property. They might still be able to rehab it for a reasonable cost, but if that property sits for 3 or 4 years, it's just going to deteriorate. And so, yes, his idea is a faster transfer of title. But a lot of people in those communities, we'll get to it, like in Detroit, we had a neighbor behind us that had bought a house from the bank, lived there for a year. The bank screwed up the paperwork and evicted him, and they'd made their payments. So that's 2004, 2005. But, the titles get really, really dicey in this situation. So anyway, they talk about how much it costs to fix up a house when it gets into a situation. It says, once this occurs, it's much more cost effective to tear the properties down rather than put what may amount to $80,000 to $100,000 in repairing them. You can take down a house for $12,000 to $15,000, but you can't fix it up for anything close to that, and that's absolutely true. And it goes to that, it says there was systematic racism and all that excitement, but that's not really where I'm at on the story. I'm at, look, these neighborhoods are being destroyed by vacant homes, vacant property. Is there something we can do about it? That's what I'm thinking about. I'm trying to look kind of forward. That's pretty much where I am on that article. So, I had some thoughts. I had some questions, but I did want to go through things. In 10 minutes, I'm not going to solve the problem, but I did want to talk through some things. So, number one, let me get my screen where it needs to be. Here, okay. Number one, this is an underreported issue, and why is that? Well, I see it in a couple of different ways. When I lived in Detroit, anytime you would see press about how terrible Detroit was, as a resident, it was like, it wasn't good. It was as if they were kind of picking on you for things that you didn't have anything to do with. So maybe there's some of that, and maybe there's some of people don't care. If you're living in a nice place, why should you care? Why should you care about something like that? So number two, there are often, like, when you try to sell a house in these places, or when you try to buy a house, there's oftentimes no good comps. So a bad comp leads to a bad sale or an inability to get funding. So as an example, let's say you list a house, say you fix up a house in a neighborhood, and you want $150,000 for your efforts, okay? And the appraiser says it's only worth 80, okay? The buyer's gonna have to come up with the difference or some percentage of the difference. Why would a buyer do that when they could go somewhere else and buy something that appraises? So you've got a structural finance problem here. So even if you did go in, the person that buys it is going to have to pay for it in cash, and that's not easy, even in one of the more nicer neighborhoods. So you've got that problem. And then from an economic perspective, imagine a situation where you buy a house and it continues to go down in value every year. And then contrast that with buying a home in the suburbs, in some suburbs, where houses tend to appreciate in value every year. The maintenance gets overlooked. And as an example, let's say I buy a house for $300,000, and a new roof for that house is $14,000. Now, I know, or I have a pretty good idea to believe that I'm going to live in this house for a while, and sure enough, 5 years into the future, the house is going to sell for $330,000. The roof has 15 to 20 years left on it, and I'm up $16,000 after I paid for this roof. But contrast that with a home that you buy for $80,000. Roof is the same size, and it will also cost $14,000 for a replacement. In 5 years, your house is now worth $60,000. So you lost the $20,000 in equity and the $14,000 for the roof you put on. So you're at negative $34,000. The difference, one property's in a stable neighborhood and one's in a neighborhood that's in decline. So these people that live in these communities don't want their properties to go down in value, okay? That's not the case. They're not actively trying to make that happen. We have a system of where appraisals, benefit certain things and other times penalize things, and they certainly penalize these communities. So I don't buy the argument that a stronger building code enforcement will magically fix this issue. And in my opinion, the more strict the building codes are, the less the chance an investor will take to make repairs or improvements. So you can make really, really strict ordinances for the buildings, but you already got a terrible situation. And the more cost you add for the repairs, the less of a chance an investor is going to want to take on that property. So I broke it down like that. I also broke it down in a couple different ways. I just want to go over those real quick. So number one, the economics have failed in the big cities. There's more vacant land or homes that are vacant than what the city can take care of as their tax base shrinks. So, you looked at it in Detroit, at least, huge city, thriving city. Over the years, more and more people move out. Over the years, less and less in taxes. All of a sudden, you can't afford the police department. You can't afford all these things. And it gets bad. But the economics have totally failed. So that leads it, that puts it on the people in the community. And they're very good people, but in a bad spot. So from my experience, crime is not the issue as much as the perception of crime. The perception of crime can take decades to overcome, if ever. So you aren't going to put all the bad guys in jail. You might as well accept it and build around them. That's the way I see it. Crime is an issue in the suburbs. Crime is an issue everywhere. It seems to be magnified in the cities, in the big cities, and I think that's unfortunate. So one way to look at kind of rebuilding some of these spaces is that you can look at the culture, and it's good for economics. The more restaurants, bars, clubs, social clubs, things of that nature in a location can help improve things more quickly. So if there is a famous restaurant, okay, you can build around the restaurant, okay? Famous bar. If you have something that you can build around and anchor, you have a much better chance of redevelopment. There's so much land that is vacant. Cities should focus on specific areas rather than a piecemeal approach. Take a particular section and use grants to rehabilitate those areas for housing. Tax credits are not enough. Do the things that bring people and investment. Tax policy, zoning, like I said, grants, they can be used effectively here. Maybe you change the set-asides on property. Maybe you change the lot sizes. One of the issues I see in the heavily urban areas is that there just isn't a place for your big box retailers. The streets and blocks are set up in a way that it's too small, and your main streets are clogged with too few lanes or stoplight after stoplight. So, the world we live in right now is the big box retailers. You have your Walmarts, your Targets, things of this nature. Those don't have small footprints. They need to have big areas. In St. Louis and South City, at least, there's a spot where right off the highway where there was an industrial plant that wasn't any good, and so they put a couple of retailers in a row, and that's the kind of stuff you should be looking at. Lastly, this is what I've seen. So there's an odd issue that comes across. It's like there's this idea of divine right. The idea that because your parents or grandparents lived in a place, this means that you have some sort of right to live there. And that somehow supersedes any sort of economic reality. So when I tell people to move out of places that are terrible, I'm met with, this is a place where I grew up, or this is where I'm from. And I just wanted to point out that wealthy people move all the time for jobs, but they can move because the real estate they are selling is either stable or growing up. The poor don't have that ability. So they have city pride, but they're also stuck. Developers and politicians see income demographics on a map and they say, there are poor people here. We need more poor people housing. That's the absolute wrong approach, in my opinion. You need quality housing that people can own. That means single family homes. This is the only way to help those people with city pride. Either they can sell and be rewarded financially when things turn around, or they can stay and live in their community knowing that they are building generational wealth. This does not happen with miles and miles of low-income rental housing. It's a trap. One of the things I learned in Detroit is that it isn't the people of the community that are the problem. They're the exception. It's the politicians, technocrats, and outright white-collar criminals that really mess up the cities. Intense focus should be placed on those leaders to ensure cronyism isn't taking place. So that's what I think. Terrible to see vacant lots, in especially now. There's a terrible housing crisis in America. There's a shortage. And we've got all these cities where you just vacant land, where people are dumping stuff. You got torn down, you got houses that are not being torn down, that are abandoned, that are just an eyesore, causing all kinds of problems. There is a path forward. There is a path forward. And so, maybe this issue gets reported more if we talk about it. That's my hope in producing the video today, on the podcast as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.